Welcome to the Art and Science of Marketing Communications. I have my dear friend and fellow Lauren with me today, Lauren Musto, and she is the brand new CEO and founder of North Star Story Co. She was on last year when she was in the corporate world, and now I have dragged her to the dark side of entrepreneurship, and she is going to talk to us about everything that we talked about last week and have been focusing on this month as far as addressing political issues that are going on, because it's happening everywhere on social, and we're seeing a lot of questions come in from people about how to handle it. So Lauren is going to tell us from her perspective, being in-house for so long and now switching to the dark side. But Lauren, tell us a little bit what you've been up to since we last saw you about a year ago.
Yes, it's so good to be back. Thank you for having me. And you are always this energetic and bubbly. And it's one of my favorite things about you, in addition to your fabulous first name. So it's been a whirlwind of a year, certainly, from a political, social perspective and how that integrates with our business activities. There's been a lot happening. But I am brand spanking new to this entrepreneurial adventure, launching North Star just earlier this month. I officially came out with it on International Women's Day, which I thought was very appropriate. I was going to do it a little later, but it's like, no, I'm feeling inspired. Let's just get it out there into the world. And my focus really is on corporate storytelling. And so much of the events that happen around us very much tie into that. So I'm super excited to chat with you on it today.
Oh, I'm so excited. And I didn't even realize the Women's Day connection, but now that you say that, yeah, that is a perfect day to launch. So tell us, I think one thing that we talked about last week and that people think is, how do I respond to all these things happening in the world? What kind of reaction do I have? And but one thing that we said last week and you hear all the time is like, you really don't want to have that like knee-jerk reaction. You don't want to just react. And one thing that, when we were preparing for this, you said was why you want to have a foundation before a social moment hits. Mm-hmm. So tell us, what do those foundations look like? What do you mean by that? How have you advised as an internal comms, and now how would you kind of translate that to your role externally? Give us the scoop.
Yeah. So I think before we dive in there, you use the perfect words, being react and respond. And one thing, I try to be very thoughtful about. Reacting is when emotion is in the driver's seat, and responding is when intellect is. And it's not that emotion shouldn't be considered, because we all have emotional reactions to these things. And certainly, as a company, that leadership, that value system, that can have an emotional reaction, but we don't want it to be, as you mentioned, a knee-jerk reaction and deriving these things. From a foundational perspective, it really comes down to, what have you established in your company as your North Star? What is your purpose? What are you striving for? And what are the values that you're holding yourselves and your employees accountable to? And when you have those foundations in place, it becomes much, much easier to take a look at whatever may be going on in the world at the moment and say, yes, this is something that hits our values. We want to respond to it. Or this isn't necessarily core to who we are and what we're trying to do. We don't need to get into this, political commentary that's going on online.
Yeah, I think that it's such a good point about really thinking with either emotion or rationale. And you put it so eloquently. And I think that you really want to differentiate from a company perspective. It's one thing if it's me or you from our personal brands, or if you're listening to this and you are thinking about building a personal brand or you already have one. It is a little bit of a different component if you are coming at it from an individual versus a company. A company really, more so than, and anyone needs to follow a foundation and a North Star, but there's so many more ramifications with a company. And that's why it's important to get everybody on board. How do we handle when what the company says is maybe not what everyone on board thinks, or what, and I'm just throwing this out there, this was not one of the topics that we prepared, but as you were talking and saying, it got me thinking, like, how do we align people when everyone may not be on the same page? I mean, that's why you got to work for yourself, in my humble opinion. But,
Yeah.
but yeah, what do you think?
So I think, again, if you're being led by your value system and what you're working on, you can provide that context to it. I think it's also important to note that when something happens, there aren't two emotions. It's not, jubilation or condemnation. There's a whole bunch of stuff in the middle in terms of how we could be commenting on something, both externally as well as, internally to our people. And that's another thing to consider. We were originally entering this conversation with, what does a company say? What's their public statement or sentiment? Yeah. You can choose not to say something publicly, but can choose to say something internally. So at the same token, at least your team that is, helping propel this company forward, you can have a more direct and a more in-depth conversation with them to provide more context there, and insights, whether, if you need to have a town hall, if this is a big moment, or if it's something, I don't want to say more minor, that's not the right terms, but, less global scale or less impactful to your business. You can allow them to ask those questions and provide more candor with your people than you could, in a official statement of the company, or maybe something you're posting on the social channels. At the end of the day, though, we're responsible for the company's reputation. That is of utmost importance. So I don't want to say it doesn't matter what others think, but that is what needs to drive our thinking and our strategy and our writing for some of these response statements.
Yeah, and I think if you've ever seen someone's, I think they do it a lot on Twitter, but if you've ever seen in someone's profile, a lot of times they'll say, like, opinions are my own. Yes. And that's why, because when something is a little bit more major or has the potential to be more polarizing, it is really important, especially for the executive team or more visible people, to have that kind of differentiation. I don't see as much on here on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm. Probably because LinkedIn is much more, has that like dichotomy between personal profiles and companies, where it's not as much of a differentiation on Twitter. But that is why you'll see that, is because just because your company thinks a certain way does not mean you have to think the exact same way. It just means you all have to be on board.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I have seen instances too where, especially where we're in communications, we're in such a visible role within our organizations, but also externally. We're, broadly speaking, we might be one of the few select groups that are proactive and commenting on things or talking about things, be it LinkedIn, be it, Facebook, Instagram, pick your platform. And I have noticed we sometimes can be held to a higher standard. And if your personal views are in opposition or in contradiction to what the company's viewpoint is, I think it's okay to say that, but you also have to be okay if there are ramifications from that. Like, is this event, is this moment a hill I'm willing to die on? And if it's not, maybe, again, it's not condemnation, but it's disappointment, or it's not jubilation, but it's I'm pleased. And we can apply that to the corporate positioning as well. It's a really interesting dichotomy between the personal brand and the corporate brand. And I do agree with you. I think LinkedIn does have a nice-ish separation, but also comms people, I think in general are under, you know, a magnifying glass a little bit because we're out there a bit more. And we are, you know, I know when I go to company pages and you can swipe through and see recent posts by employees, a lot of times
Yes.
it's marketers, it's communications people, it's, you know, C-suite people. It's those more visible roles within an organization. So just something to be mindful of.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's a good point. And so how about understanding when when the team should comment, because I think, you know, right now we're talking about like addressing an issue, we're talking about like being ahead of it, or how about, I mean, there are so many trolls these days, there's so many people that are just, you know, really angry or, you know, really passionate about topics. So it's not unheard of to see people commenting on your posts that may have nothing to do with it, or if you do come up with that really highly crafted, curated, beautiful statement that you're so proud of, and then you get the one person that finds fault in whatever you've said. When do you advise people to comment, to not comment? And on, I think we've kind of addressed it on a larger scale. But yeah, I think more on the interaction side, the engagement side.
It's a really good point. So again, I think that foundation bit is important. Is the event that's happening that we're going to comment on in contradiction to our values? Does it impact our business at all? But also our people. So like some of the natural disasters we've seen happening, such as the fires in Southern California. Do we have people in that area? Could be, and your headquarters may not be there, but you might have, a field team that's based in the area. So that might, impact how and what you want to comment on. In terms of the trolls, you don't want a ton of them, obviously, but I do think one or two is almost not a bad thing, because it's going to give you that gut check of, yes, this was the right thing to say, because I still believe it was the right thing to make a post or make a statement. Or it might, if you're not having that reaction, like maybe we want to take a look at what our strategy is in the future, what our guidelines are for commenting. With the trolls, I also think, again, from a foundational perspective, I've worked at a lot of companies where we've had social media guidelines put in place. And a lot of times we think about those in terms of what employees can say or how they can represent the organization in their personal feeds, as well as, high level, this is what,
Yeah.
especially in pharma biotech, right? We're not going to make claims and we're not going to do this. And this is, the reporting structure. But when it comes to these moments, part of those guidelines can be, this is our channel. Like, this is the company channel, and we get to have the conversations that we want to have on here. And if there is something that's completely erroneous or, off the charts crazy, we have the authority to delete that or address it in a manner that, I don't want to say puts them in their place, but a little bit does. And I think if you look at some of the
Yeah.
Twitter, you look at some of the Twitter accounts of more consumer facing brands, I think you can get a lot of inspiration there on how to handle something in a tactfully, but also sternly, if that makes sense. There can be a lot of
Yeah.
inspiration in industries outside of those core biotech pharma that are so regulated. But if there is something that you have to be open to the fact that people will not agree with you, because this is, whatever it is, potentially a divisive issue, or there's multiple opinions on anything. You could have a debate with friends on what SPF in your sunscreen you need. 20 is fine. No, you got to go 50. I mean, you could have an argument or disagreement on literally anything, and you need to be
Very true.
prepared for that. If you're not okay with the trolls coming out or dissenting opinions on your channels, maybe we shouldn't be commenting. And that's an okay conversation. And it's okay for that to be your strategy too.
Yeah. What do you think about turning off comments altogether?
I don't love it,
You know.
because it takes away the social component. Like, if you're not okay with some comments, I think maybe you should be thinking about should I be making a post on social, or maybe this should be a one-way message via a company statement that's either issued over the wires or posted to the website.
Yeah.
If you're not okay in the dialogue, that should be, then why are we doing this if we're not okay with some dialogue, I guess would be my question.
Yeah, it's very true. I did a couple early on when I was first starting. I did a couple of political campaigns as the social media gal. And I do remember one of the big things was that fine balance of like, you want the comments, but turning off the comments shows you're not willing to engage, which is exactly the opposite of what a political candidate wants to put out there. So, I think in other industries, it's probably, sometimes you will see like recording artists or celebrities turn their comments off. And I feel like in that situation, yeah, you know what, it makes sense. No one wants somebody be trolling, an actress that just has an opinion. But for something, a more traditional industry like ours, turning off the comments is really gonna show people where you stand. I mean, inadvertently or on purpose. So.
Yeah. And I think too, there are plenty of moments where it's okay not to say something if it doesn't impact. Again, if you have those guidelines in place, you don't have to be doing it. It's okay to say this is not an area we need to play in. Relatedly, if it is highly contentious for whatever reason, you can, and you're thinking about saying something, you don't have to be the first company out there to post. We've implemented a strategy in the past called, like, we can be a fast follower. Like, let's see how some of the other companies are commenting. Are big pharma commenting? Are our competitors commenting? Are those key biotech companies that are, kind of those guiding lights in the industry, are they commenting? And if they are, how are they looking? What are they saying? What's the context? Or how in depth are they going? How high level are they going? And you can make a comment, but you don't have to be the first one. Like, just because a news item hits does not mean you need to rally the troops. Like, we have to comment right now. Sometimes you might need to, especially if it's impact, it's your business. If there's an issue with your business, your company, yes, that's a different set of rules. But you don't have to be the first person. We can do a little auditing of the landscape and see what are they saying and what's the reaction to it, and make a even more informed decision of it.
And it's such a good point, because I think this is not to sound doom and gloom at all, but we are in a pretty tumultuous news cycle these days. So if you are, snapping to respond to everything, your feed is only going to be responses to news. So I think it's about seeing what makes the most impact, what other people are doing, and really figuring, using your guiding light your mission statement to guide you. But I mean, we just are in a time when there's a lot going on. And if you respond to everything, even if it is aligned with your mission, that is going to be the only thing on your feed. That's not a good strategy. Sure, you want to stay relevant, but to only be responsive to news, that's not going to move the needle with your awareness of what you actually do.
Well, and you raise a great point there. And I'd say the other thing would be, if you are commenting on everything, the true values of your organization are going to get lost also in that noise, right? If you're commenting, like, okay, the feed is going to be all, political commentary or social commentary, let's say. But also, when you do say something serious about a topic that does matter to your organization, nobody's going to hear it.
Yeah.
And it becomes the whole, and marketers and comms people will appreciate the sentiment, but when you speak to everyone, you speak to no one. So I think the principle can still be pulled through in this capacity.
Which actually, that's a great segue to the last topic that we wanted to cover. And we already kind of talked about it, but I just want to make sure we hit all the points. We identified talking about tackling the challenges of different audiences that require different levels of commentary. And this is especially true in our industry, where life science companies often have patients, investors, media, employees. I'm sure I'm leaving out like 10, but something that we do every day as people that work in comms for the life science industry is try and identify how to tell our general messaging to various audiences, which can feel like an easy feat when you're trying to figure out something a little bit more tumultuous or cultural implications. How do we talk to the patients versus the investors? It's, two very different messages. And again, not diving too much into what's actually going on, but it's still very much, the truth that those are two very different levels of knowledge of what's going on and implications. So what do you think about that kind of?
It's a really interesting question. And I think a couple of things. One, we need to figure out what the overarching or that core corporate response is going to be. What is the statement? What do we believe about this situation and the implications to the company, the business, our people, our patients, et cetera? What is that core statement? And that needs to be the foundation. If media are reaching out, if investors are reaching out one-on-one, we can always provide a bit more context for things that are important to that audience. But I think it all filters back to that. In terms of the level of response, again, that could also be something where, hey, our corporate statement does not need to go out on our social channels, but hey, maybe our head of patient advocacy should be reaching out to the organizations and saying, hey, we're watching. And you don't even have to have an opinion with some of these groups, but it's like, we're aware of the situation, we're monitoring it. As we have, information or updates, we will share those with you. But just flagging for different groups that we're on it, I think says a lot about the company's ethics and moral compass, even if you're not saying anything concrete.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. Well, this has been awesome. And I think that these are topics that, as a comms person, you don't really want to have to worry about. Of course, you want to just share all the great things that are happening, the funding you're getting, the patients that you're impacting. But the reality is, like I said before, we're just in a news cycle that a lot is happening, and a lot is happening in our industry. And that is, the nature of the beast. So I think hopefully today we have given you some guidelines of what to do, what not to do. But reach out if anyone has any questions. I do feel like this is a little bit of a topic that people are kind of asking questions behind the scenes. So if that's you and you're feeling nervous or anxious about that, like, you are not alone. I think it's just, the nature of the beast, like I said. But Lauren, any final words of wisdom for anybody, and tell everybody where they can find you too?
Yes. So final words of wisdom, I would say, especially when these are, hot button issues, go with your gut. We can tend to, and I am also guilty of this, it's so easy to overthink a response. It's so easy to spend 3 hours wordsmithing, a 4-sentence response statement, because we do want it to be accurate and we do want it to be appropriate and, the right level of, emotional response in the words. But always feel free to put a pause on it, step away from it, work on something else, take a 10-minute walk, come back and read it again, and go with your gut on this stuff. Because 99% of the time, your gut is not going to lead you down the wrong path of what our advice should be to management on how to respond to something, to which audiences, et cetera. And then how to find me, northstarstoryco.co. northstarstory.co. See, I'm so new. I'm still bumbling over the URL address. Feel free to check it out there, and you can find me on LinkedIn. Would love to connect with all of everybody and continue the conversation there, because I think it's an important one and it doesn't have to be a scary one.
No, definitely not. And that's why I wanted to address it head on because sometimes you just need to hear from other people that you're not alone in these, unique shifts in our world, and we're all trying to manage it. But if you ever want some feedback or discussion around it, we are here for you. The Laurens are here for you.
Yes, anytime. We might need to trademark that, Lauren. The
I
Lauren.
know the Lauren and Tessie's. Fun fact: Lauren and I
Mhm.
both have a dog named Tessie. So the penultimate
Yeah.
Bostonians. um, all right, guys. Oh, I love it. Everyone has been. We have a couple comments, so thank you guys so much. Lauren's and Tessie's
Yeah.
signing off. Have a beautiful weekend, everybody.